Welcome back to Not a Strong Start, a podcast by filmmakers who talk movies, television, and love to torture children. I'm your host, Daniel DeSangre.
I am not your host, Free Spooks.
These weeks. And I'm parental discretion is advised.
All right, so in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about our starter horror movies. So, movies that we recommend that all children should be watching to get them on the correct path of watching horror movies. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. Because I feel like there has to be a starting point. You got to start somewhere. I believe we all watch scary movies as a kids. They probably don't want to start where we started. Uh, in there, probably our early movies are not the best to recommend. But if you're a fan of horror and you want to get your kids into it, there has to be a place to start. And we don't want to wait too long because they're missing out.
They really are. And that's just where the conversation came. So, when you presented the topic about what should we be introducing to kids, and we have to come up with our own list that we think we should. The question is, do we go with what society tells us we should? Or do we go with, if I'm going to introduce children to horror movies, I should do it properly and they should see a proper form of educational horror movies. So I think if you're going to do it right, kind of go right with it. So I mean, we can kind of discuss a little more about that. But at what age would you guys say you guys started watching horror movies? Let's
Right.
start off
I was
there.
just I was just thinking, do you coast them in or do you John Wayne it and just toss them into Hellraiser? Uh,
That's that's the one. But like, hey, it's got pretty pictures in it, right? If it's like
yeah,
a cool costume design, I mean, you
there's
can kind of sell them on
puzzles.
it.
There's
The puzzle,
puzzles.
it's a puzzle
It's
movie.
it's what they do in elementary school, right?
Yeah.
So, at what age did you guys start watching horror movies? Let's say, and
Oh man.
what movies did you get introduced to?
I would think I was already watching horror movies by at least like 4 years old. I was already like watching some horror movies. Some of the earlier ones that I watched were like Child's Play. I think
Hmm.
I think my family thought like, oh, it's a doll. Like it's nothing, whatever. So I think it was that, and then I got into the legends, the icons, Friday the 13th with Jason, and my till this day favorite of all time, just because that's one of the first things I saw, Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy.
Fair enough, right?
I wasn't raised like you guys, I don't think. You guys started out really young, and I think your parents didn't mind, or some of your parents kind of like encouraged it, I think. And I was kind of sheltered. My mom didn't even want me to watch the movie Ghost because of the ghosts, the like demons in it that were just black shadows. I wasn't allowed to watch Predator, so I had to go to my uncle's house to watch the horror movies. So that's where got my introduction. So I don't know how old I was. My childhood's all a blur, but obviously Creep Show and Gremlins and a bunch of Stephen King ones because that's what my uncle had. So I watched a whole bunch of Stephen King movies when I was young, and my mom didn't really know about that, but that's probably where I started.
You sure it was the Dark Figures that he want you to watch, or it was
Yeah.
the
The
vase
clay
making
forming.
scene? Yeah, the clay form. You sure that wasn't the one?
No, because I was watching like Dirty Dancing and Pretty Woman and everything when I was a kid. Like that was okay, but like Shadow Monsters and the Predator wasn't okay. So I got messed
No,
up in a whole other way.
for us in like Latin culture, we used parenting nightmares. Nightmares is what kept us in line. It wasn't necessarily trying to be a good honorable person. It was be careful of the cacuis, be careful of La Llorona.
Cuckoo.
Yeah, you had to be careful of all that stuff. So that's what kept us in line. So watching horror movies was like PG versus the stuff that we were told. So I remember being 4 or 5 years old watching marathons of Nightmare on Elm Street. I didn't care at that time. I was perfectly fine with it. I've been watching horror movies and gore and gruesomeness since forever. And so to me, it's like, I don't think it's that bad. I think all kids can come out okay.
Man, you just opened up so many memories. Like I just remember being as a kid and the way to like try to set you straight as a
Oh
kid
yeah.
because you were acting out a little bit. They were like, what's that? Is the cuckoo?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the boogeyman? I'll tell him to take you.
Yeah.
I'll tell him to
Yeah.
take you.
So hurry up, clean your feet. Hurry up and finish that corn. I'm like, what does that have anything to do with me eating my corn? Has nothing to do with that. It's so stupid. But hey, there we go. So us watching the guy in a mask, it's fine. It's just, it's fine. Yeah. So, okay. So let's get into it then. So, what are some of the, if you're going to introduce kids, right, into it, what's a good age? Let's say a good age. What age do you think kids should start watching horror movies? And what type of horror movie would you introduce them to?
I'll be honest, I think it depends on what movie you're introducing. I feel certain
Yeah.
movies are light enough that you can probably introduce them, right when they're around, I don't know, 5, 6 years old, something like that. Other movies you might want to wait a little bit longer. So I think the age itself, oh yeah, I think the age itself is going to depend on the type of movie. I like to look at it more of like what is some of the like criteria that you feel you need to
Mm,
consider when introducing like kids to a movie? Uh, like for me, I believe, regardless of your age, of course, you probably don't want it to be overly graphic in there. You definitely don't want it to be a slow burn because
So,
you
so
want
no
it.
Terrifier 3. So you don't want to introduce
No,
them to Terrifier
no,
3.
at least not until they're 3 years old.
Not without watching the
oh my
first
God.
Terrifier. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so you don't want it to be overly graphic because you don't want to scar them at an early age. You don't want it to be a slow burn because you also want them to be entertained. Kids are going to have a shorter attention span. They need a little bit of a faster pace like happening, so you can have quality horror movie that isn't overly graphic, isn't overly violent, but it just might be too slow pace for them to really enjoy it. So you want something that's going to keep them entertained. So I think that's some of the things to keep in mind when it comes to it. And if it has an element in it that you feel your specific child would appreciate.
Mhm.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Right.
This is very it depends on parenting styles because I know people have different parenting styles. It depends on the children. Like my children are spawn of extremely sensitive parents, so they're extremely sensitive kids. So there's movies that I watched as a kid that I was like, "Oh, this is fine," that I showed my kids and my daughter's terrified. Like I was like, "Really? This is scary?" And she's like, "I can't turn it off." And I'm like, "What?" But no. So it depends on kids and stuff, but I would say yeah, definitely I wouldn't show my kids anything with like excessive like nudity, sexual scenes, sexual violence, torture, that type of thing, obviously. Also no psychological horror, like not gonna show my kids Hereditary, or something like that. They won't get it, so it's a waste. So maybe something with like a silly kind of cheesy undertone would be a good starter. Something a little more like fantasy, something a little unrealistic. Like you want to watch, give them something that's like unrealistic, I think, you know. So not gonna be like, is this what real life is? Why are you laughing?
Because you mentioned Hereditary, and again, going back to like what Dan mentioned, it made me think like, our parents probably would show us Hereditary
Yeah.
just to teach us not to put our head out the
Yeah.
window. So they'll put us through that movie for that
Literally,
one
yes.
lesson. See, this is
See?
why you don't stick your head out the
Yes.
window, and we have to watch the whole movie just for that one
See
lesson.
what happens when you don't listen to your parents? I'm like, that doesn't have anything to do with anything. Damn. I don't have a peanut allergy. All right. So I made like a little list of should and shouldn't have, right? So for these horror movies for kids, I thought it should have creepy music because kids love repetition, like Baby Shark. So the music is very enticing. So if you give me a horror movie with a good song, good sound, there's repetition, kids are gonna like that song. They're gonna want to go back to that kind of franchise. Another one is good to have kids protagonists. So if there's a kid that's inserted into said horror movie, kids tend to respond better to them. Scary elements that kids can identify with. So it can't be too grown up. It's got to be very more simple stories, things that kids can understand. Otherwise, if it's too complicated, kids aren't going to get it.
But not a
Um,
cult.
yeah, exactly. The cult, they're not really going to get it. If you try to go Midsummer, they're probably not going to get it a little bit. I did just watch Maxine last night. Probably not kid appropriate.
Yeah.
Especially there's an alleyway scene and a heel stomping down. I won't get into graphics, but I was like, whoa, there it is. All right. And then jump scares. I think good little jump scares gets kids going. So therefore, when kids start doing like the haunted mazes and stuff like that, you want to get them kind of grouped up. I think jump scares are one of
That's
the
for you.
easiest. Jump scares are one of the easiest scare tactics and devices. I think so. Introduce them there early. And then monsters breathing in the shadows. I think that's good for kids. When they sit there, they see the shadows and they're afraid of like the darkness and everything. I think that's appropriate for kids. And then paranormal, where there's ghosts and things, that's a little more realistic. What I said shouldn't be is anything with sex or torture gore. So all the those ones should stay out of it. Complex horror themes. It's a little too complex for them. Anything that's psychological horror is going to go right over their head. They're going to get bored. Anything that's drug-induced horror, they're not going to do good with that. And then anything that's like long, drawn out story beats, things with therapy talk, like kids aren't going to be involved in that stuff. Keep it to the gruesome. No, not the gruesome. Keep it to the gore. Keep it to the breathing inside their heads. That's what we want to get them on.
Yeah, exactly. Jump scares, good for kids, bad for adults. Boring for
Yes,
adults.
exactly. That's poor writing on that part. But yeah, it's great for kids. So I get it. All right. So let's get into some of the starter horror movies that you guys would recommend for kids.
Hmm.
Um, I went for my first one. I went back to the 80s. I feel a lot of these like concepts that we've mentioned
Hmm.
fit with a lot of the movies that we would get back in the 80s. And I'm gonna go with The Gate.
Oh,
This
yeah.
they
Oh
get
my God.
uh just to
I
read the
still remember
premise
the
here.
rocket underneath his bed.
Yeah,
That's
it
always
has
what
so
I
many
remember.
memorable moments that you grow
Yes,
up and you still remember
that's a
those
good one.
moments, even though you haven't seen it for years. But just to read the description for it for the audience, uh, basically when Al and Glenn's they leave town for the weekend, Al uses the opportunity to throw a party for his little brother, and they decide to explore a hole that was left behind by tree removal service in the backyard. Turns out this hole may or may not be a gateway to hell that has been opened up. You know,
Moral of the
um,
story, don't do yard work. Let it
exactly.
grow
This is why you
out.
don't do chores.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
our parents will probably be like, if you would have taken care of the yard, no gates to hell will open up. So remember that for next time I tell you to go take care of the tree.
As we say, that's a difference of opinion, Mom, but okay. You stand on that
Oh my
side, I
But
stand
God.
on this side.
yeah, this is one not overly it's not overly gory. It involves kids as your heroes in this, so that's something that kids can they can make that connection and they follow that stuff. It has plenty of action in it. It kind of moves along at a good pace. It isn't a slow burn, and I feel with the kid using actual like toys as way to fight back. Like I feel like that's an aspect that kids can enjoy because it's not like a kid going something that the normal kids don't have access to in order to do this. So like kids, they like imagination. When they watch things, they like to replay it in their mind afterwards, recreate it with their toys, recreate it physically. And this is the type of movie where you could see the kids running around like, we're gonna get the monster quick. Go get the toy, get the rocket, let's do it. So I feel like this fits overall. It's a PG-13 movie, but honestly, I think it's PG-13 because of that time frame. I don't think it would hit the PG-13 criteria if you were to release it now. It'd probably be just regular like PG at this point. So it's the old ratings compared to the new ratings. But that's my first choice.
Okay. Right.
Um, I tried to think of something different and something newer that I would really think like, oh, what's a new movie that I'd like want to introduce my kids to horror and something safe. And honestly, I can't wait to show them some like M. Night Shyamalan movies. I think my son will be really into that, especially because he is kind of the writing's almost like sci-fi in a way. But I think The Village is one of the first ones I want to show my kids. And even though I know Jose, you don't like it, but you don't have to consider it horror. But anyway, that's good. That's good for kids because I just find this movie to be really bright and colorful and cheery for some reason. It's really like fantasy. It teaches good lessons that even if you have a handicap, you can be the hero. And it also teaches you not to trust people in control and always ask questions, which is one of my favorite parts of the whole movie as an adult. I'm like, yeah, man, question the people in charge because they're going to use fear tactics control you. That's how you can like start them young to like not trust the government. So I kind of like that, even though I agree with the people in the village and I understand why they're living off the grid. But anyway, for all those reasons, teaches you about like resilience and strength and devotion, and it's romantic, and I just think it's a good. There's no real gore in it, and there's no sexual scenes in it, and it's just sweet. And I think it's a nice fantasy horror movie to show kids as like a little gateway, ease them in.
The only thing I would think about that one is I don't know if the story moves at a fast enough pace to keep kids intrigued because usually kids have a
Mm,
little more attention span.
maybe it
That'd be
depends
my
on the
only
kid, right?
question.
I mean, it depends on the kid because I'm also trying to think
Yeah.
about my kids, and my son's his favorite movie is the 1954 Godzilla. So I'm
Hmm?
like, some kids would. Some kids would. I think
Okay.
I would have liked that as a kid. So that's what I want. I can't wait to show my kids that movie.
I went with a movie that is it's a little more old school. But it's about good family bonding. I went with Poltergeist. It's about
Ah,
kids, you know,
Are you
you have
serious?
two young kids that are main characters, and it's all about meeting new friends. So I saw Poltergeist as a kid, and I think as much as it is, it's like I think it's good for kids. It's sort of like I'm not a coddler.
Hmm,
I don't coddle kids too
no.
much. I think if this scares you, let's throw you in the deep end. Let's overcome this fear. Don't live in fear. And I think with Poltergeist, it kind of sets up like it has the paranormal, so it has enough where it feels realistic enough to actually really scare kids because at the end of the day, the horror movie should scare kids. But it's not too scary at the same time either. It also shows, that the father is the hero of the story. You see him and the mom. You see them putting themselves out there to rescue the kids. You see it really does tackle a lot with the paranormal, and I think kids tend to respond to that very well. They get very scared with paranormal, but I remember loving Poltergeist as a kid, and the scary clown with the doll underneath trying to go after the sun. That was pretty scary, man. A good proper horror movie needs to have some proper horror elements that a kid walks away and say, "Yeah, that was pretty scary." There's got to be some scary moments, but it's not too gruesome either. You don't really have a lot of bloody scenes. You don't have anything like that that's too gory that makes kids feel like they themselves. It's just more kids getting sucked into a television essentially, or sucked into a closet.
funny enough, that movie
You had it too.
has a lower rating. It's a PG compared to The Gate, which is PG-13. So
Just
by
saying.
the ratings, it's more family friendly than
It
what
probably
The
has
Gate
it
is.
probably has a lower rating too than The Village. It
So,
could.
but you hear Poltergeist because it's a movie that's so iconic within horror. You
Mm,
kind of a lot of times people will mention it when they're talking about supernatural aspects. That's one of the ones that gets mentioned along with The Exorcist, and you kind of put those together. But if you really like actually break down the movies, they're on completely different levels when it comes to the type of horror that they are portraying and how they portray it. So I can see, I feel that in the village, they were not ones that I would automatically think of, but it is true. It is lighter horror in the way it presents the horror aspects of it
mm.
for both of those.
Yeah, because I thought about when you said Exorcist, I'm like, no, Exorcist, it's so much foul language, it's so much usage and physical stuff that you don't want kids seeing. When you really think about Poltergeist, outside of like the creepiness that you see in walls and things, there's nothing really gruesome for that kids can't really be watching. It's more of just the fear of them seeing these paranormal things and in these monsters and stuff, but you're not really seeing anything so foul other than the real skeleton that was in a pool, but you're not going to know that. You're going to think it was a prop body. So, hey, kids want to know that.
It
Fun
was
fact.
more
And
scary.
it teaches you to cut down on screen time. This is why you
Exactly.
don't watch TV for too
That's
long.
why you
You
don't
might.
watch iPads. Same thing could happen.
For the next one I had, so I wanted to kind of take it up a notch. I wanted to go with a newer movie, but also kind of take it up a notch. So like with The Gate, I feel like that's like right off the bat, like intro, getting you
Mm,
through. But if like your kid's still a kid, but he started to see a couple of like gates and like movies within that realm, and now you kind of really want to push it up a little bit, the limit, then Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which was from 2019,
mhm.
in there. And I feel That one again it also has kids protagonists, but the difference with this one is you do have some scenes in there that are truly creepy. Nothing's overly graphic, nothing's overly violent in it, but it has a higher level of factor than you have with the other movie that I mentioned, the Gate in it, especially with some of the visual creatures and stuff that get introduced within it. So I feel like it's a another step of kind of building the horror tolerance of the kid without going overboard straight into this is for adult movies. So that's why I got Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark as my next one.
Nice. And they do have the creepy visuals and stuff because I used to love reading
There
those
is.
books when I was a kid. And they really, really, with the special effects, the prosthetic designs and stuff, they did a really good job bringing those illustrations to life. So that's a good one.
That big giant creature in
The
the
giant
hospital,
one, man.
like even as an
Yeah.
adult, I'm like, that's creepy. That looks
Yeah.
really creepy.
Yes. Good
Hmm.
pick.
That's the one. That's the one that comes to mind when I think about that
Uh,
movie. I'll go with an old one now, and I have Daniel to thank for this one, but it popped in my head when I read this structure. But honestly, Cat's Eye.
It
I
really
think
is. I saw
Cat's
that
Eye,
as a kid.
cat, yeah, Cat's Eye. I think is a good one. And I remember watching it, and I was like, "Hey, this is one that I can definitely show my kids as like an entryway one because it's anthology horror, not as graphic as Creepshow, which is the one I really want to show them, but I won't because it's too much. But Cat's Eye is a little more. I mean, some of the stories, of course, are uh adult themed, but you have that little troll one at the end, and that one is just like so good for kids, and like it follows a kitty, and it's just Drew Barrymore. Like I think that's a really good one to start kids off of, and I have Daniel to thank for that one because I had no idea the movie even existed until he
I
told me
literally
about
watched that
it.
one as a kid. I remember watching that one as a little kid. That was one of the first horror movies I've ever seen. And it was the
I've never
cat. It was
Yeah.
seen
like
it.
it was like the little cat, and you see the troll and all that, but it wasn't anything scary at all, in my opinion. It was more like
No.
gruesome, like ew, like when you would see some of the storylines, it was like gross to see, but it wasn't really horrific, which was good.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's a perfect entry horror movie for sure. So thank
hmm
you.
hmm So here's one that I have. So I'm gonna pick one that's not as rough, I guess. But here's one that was really rough in its own way. Witches. Witches is one of
Ooh.
those
Yeah,
movies that
yeah.
I saw as a kid. But when you see Angelica Houston take her face off and you see the monster face underneath it, I was like, oh my God, this thing
Yeah,
is
what?
gruesome. So this is why I bring this movie up, right? So that I think it was a British production. I think. Maybe it was American. I don't know. I wanna say it was a British production, I think. Just because maybe the lead character's English and like it takes place over there. So like maybe it's I don't know.
I
But
saw
when you
some biscuits.
yeah, there you go. If there's biscuits and there's
Trumpets,
mice, it's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
British. So you have
right?
when you have something like the movie Witches and you have something like Poltergeist, to me, I would actually venture to say that Witches is the scarier movie of the two because
Ooh.
you see more of the gruesomeness and you have these monsters that are literally trying to eat these boys and like eat these children, turning them into mice and eating them. That's the, like that's more gory when you actually sit down and think about that. That you're actually being transformed into a mouse, so you're helpless and you're being consumed, versus just a ghost that's just pulling you into a closet. Like I understand that's scary because we're hearing voices and things, but really, Witches is really more of a scarier movie between the two of them. So I still say Witches is probably like more intended for like little 3, 4 year olds. I think I didn't get away with that, you know, because there's cute little mouses and stuff like that, and they have cute little voices when they turn into mouses. But Angelica Houston,
Houses.
yeah, but like Angelica Houston, like she did such a great job on this one. She was phenomenal in this movie.
I feel that's a movie that I have heard many people later in their years saying that that movie stuck with them.
Have you
And
seen it,
mainly,
Jose, or no?
oh yeah,
Oh, okay,
as
okay,
a
okay,
kid.
okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay, good.
yeah. But like I feel like that's one movie that if I've had a conversation with people to talk about movies that they saw when they were younger and it stuck with them, that one I've heard that get mentioned a lot more than the other movies. It's mainly, especially that scene, the reveal scene, which was not smooth at all, which I think made it even crazier. It wasn't just a quick like rip off. It's like I'm going through. It's like what is happening right now? What
Yes.
is
And the
this?
sound design, like you hear like stretching and ripping, and then you see them all
Yeah.
doing that, and they're all getting bloated with the poison
Ugh.
soup, and it's like, oh my God, the
Just
sound design.
you're watching that
Oof.
as a kid, and now you're paranoid of every
Yes.
woman you run into in a public place.
You should be. You should be.
And it has Mr. Bean in it. Hello. Kid
Oh,
friendly, Mr. Bean.
So I'm gonna go with an oldie one again. 1990s. I'm gonna go with Tremors. Uh,
oh yes,
Yeah.
yes, that was on my list too, and I just saw it
I'm
as an
yeah,
waiting for
adult
it.
like last month.
yeah. I feel this is it's a fun movie. It's good pace going through. It's not really again, it's not overly graphic or violent. You might have some swear words in it, but what kid's not hearing swear words these days? So, but it's just fun. I remember I watched this movie as a kid myself too, and I really enjoyed it. And I remember getting out there and being out on the playground or being out in the schoolyard and stuff, and you would kind of play like a game of the floor is lava, but it would be like Tremors, whereas I can't
Gravel
touch the
is.
ground and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So like when you're watching it as a kid, there's an intensity to it because these things are coming through, and if you start thinking about it, it's like, oh no, you start looking down at the ground. But then, you kind of enjoy the ride through it, and I wasn't the only one kind of made a game out of it afterwards. So you're enjoying this movie beyond the fact after watching it. So I think
Mm.
that's why this is also a good starter one because it has some horror elements, but it also adds some fun elements that the kids can have, enjoy, make games out of, and things like that. So that's why I had to pick Tremors.
That's a good one, man.
Mm.
That's a good one. That was one. I
Yeah.
remember watching that one young too, and I freaking loved it, man. Like I
Yeah.
what's crazy is that as we talk about this stuff and when you brought up this topic, I was kind of really sitting back and I really swear, man, I feel horror genre is probably the genre I watched the most as a kid, more than anything else. Because
Mhm.
yes, I did watch sci-fi a lot, but it's just there wasn't as many sci-fi movies, there wasn't as many kid sci-fi movies, but I feel like even movies like Tremors, I know it's not a kid horror movie, but it feels like it is. Movies like Maximum Overdrive, like there was so many cheesy B-level horror movies that it made it so accessible to kids because it wasn't like a Friday the 13th where like, oh, just horny teenagers going at it. Like we had a lot of horror movies like this that had nothing to do with that, and it's just people getting killed by a lawnmower. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm all for that.
Okay, so this was probably my favorite movie as a kid. And as I was writing this out, I'm like, this might explain a lot as to why I'm afraid of certain things. But anyway, but I loved it. I wasn't scared of it, but I do think it is scary in a sense. And a lot of my cousins said it traumatized them. But anyway, um, The Dark Crystal,
Hmm.
I think. And now it is a dark fantasy movie, but I was like, I really want to talk about it. So I looked on like kids' horror movies, and this
It
was on
counts.
a few of the
Oh, it
lists.
counts.
So it
It
does?
counts. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It
Okay.
counts.
So wanted that reassurance. Thank you.
Hmm.
Okay, so the reason why it's so scary, first of all, there's like horrific imagery in this movie. There's these rotting, crumbling bird. This is why I'm like, this is why I don't like birds. Like bird looking scary creatures. There's these giant beetles that make this creepy sound when they walk that trap you. And they're going after gelflings, which are these little like elf looking things that are kind of their kids, I think. And but they're a hero. So it's kind of like, they don't really mention that they're children, but they're very childlike. So the children are the hero in the movie essentially. But anyway, you got these scary ass beetles. This weird ogre woman who pops her eye out to look around, and she's a good guy, but like she's scary. Um, there's these poor soulless slaves that work for these Skeksis, the bird guys, that sit you down and drain you of your youth through your eyeballs, your essence. And what they do is they drink your essence to be young. Like it's horrifying. And then to me, one of the scariest things in that movie are these things that the Gelflings ride on. They're like these big, huge white rabbit things on stilts. And they are so creepy looking. And it's a good story though, and it has a heroic ending, but damn, it's scary. I Jim Henson, you did it.
It is like that. There's like a list of when you look to see what children horror movies are. That one's on there. Legends on there. They have
Mhm.
ones like Labyrinth is on there, and I'm like Labyrinth is not a horror movie. That's where I'm draw the line. I'm like that one's not scary. Okay, I understand there could be a couple of scary moments, but I'm like
Sometimes just
that's
off of
too
imagery, they're
easy.
like your horror.
Yeah, I'm like,
Exactly.
look,
Mhm.
I get it, okay? David Bowie going commando on movie. I know that's a little scary, but no, that can't count on it. So I hear you on that. Dark Crystal is one of those. Even the design, the creature designs and everything is very creepy looking. The visuals,
Yeah,
like, damn, Jim Henson, you have to hit us like that.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I went with one that's kind of falls in the same category, and I went with Return to Oz. So Return to Oz is a very, very creepy one. So they cast Dorothy is the crazy girl from The Craft. So already when
Yeah.
you cast that actress as Dorothy, great, okay. But then we open up with Dorothy that's in an insane asylum. Why is this a children's movie? It's not. I feel like this movie tricks you into thinking it's a children's movie, and it's not. You have the main antagonist, a creepy queen woman that can remove her head and swap heads and put it on her body. Like you have the wheelies, whatever, where there's like these long, weird guys and like rollerblade looking things, and they even make weird, creepy noises, and they're trying to, they're out here for blood, essentially. So everything about this movie is where you take the Wizard of Oz and you think it's this exactly what the Wizard of Oz is, where you think it's nice, it's sweet, it's kids, it's this. If parents didn't really know what Return to Oz was and they just rented it and popped it in there for the movies, there's so many creepiness things to it. And why this makes it so horrific to me is because kids get lulled into it, where you get pulled into, oh, I recognize Dorothy. Oh, I know Toto. Oh, I know these characters. And then when you get pulled, it's like they even have the pumpkin guy that's in it that looks a lot like Jack Skeleton. So there's a lot of scary elements to Return to Oz. And why is there a psych ward? Why do kids have to understand that they themselves can go to a psych ward where they're deprived away from their family and they're basically in jail? Like, why do kids need to see this?
That's where we're gonna send you if you don't eat your vegetables.
Exactly. If
They're
you don't eat your
corn.
green beans, if you don't eat your green beans, you're gonna get pulled right into that. The chupacabra is gonna pull us by our ankles.
Ah, oh, these are good ones. I feel we should just rapid fire some
Yeah,
honorable
yeah.
mentions. I know there was
Yep.
some ones
Yeah,
that we
yeah,
left
yeah.
behind.
So if you have a few, just hit the rest of your honorable mentions. We'll
Yeah,
go
yeah.
through them.
So, one that I have here, it's a newer one on Disney, is No One Will Save You.
Mm.
Alien horror-based movie. I
Mm-hmm.
think that one was good.
Mm-hmm.
Another one's another classic, one of Dan's favorites. He watches it every other weekend. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Nice
No.
fight well with clowns in there. So I got that one. If it's around Christmas time, Krampus is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
That's a
get
good one.
overly too crazy. And then if you want to go the more animated route, this is a popular choice of all these things, is we got Coraline.
Mm-hmm.
Is another one that has some horror elements, but is also animated, so it could be a good intro. So those are some of the other miscellaneous ones that I had.
That's a good one. Coraline I had on my list as well. That's a good one. And that one's a lot more scary and way more creepy for kids, I think, sometimes, and even some of the scarier ones we mentioned. So people
I
hear
agree.
certain, because we'll mention certain ones and you think, oh, well, those are easily horror movies. Like, yeah, but sometimes society just labels them or the idea behind them is that they're straight horror. But sometimes you watch something like Coraline, that could be very traumatizing to a young little kid
It
watching
is
that.
like that one's probably more for kids than all the ones that I mentioned. And the only reason I didn't mention it before is because it always gets talked about for that reason.
Yes, I agree. That's a good pick. All right, Marie.
Um, Obviously Gremlins is a good Christmas movie and a
And
good
part two.
and
Part two,
part two, yeah.
especially,
And part it's
especially part
really
two.
comedic, right? I haven't seen that
Yeah.
in so long. Beetlejuice, I thought until I tried to show it to my daughter and we had to turn it off because she was so scared. And now she's traumatized of Beetlejuice. And I'm like, what? This? But I guess it's
Ah,
pretty realistic though. If you watch it. They're used to like YouTube and like a lot of graphic effects, not
Five
practical
Nights at
effects. So maybe
Freddy.
it's just too real. Yeah. And then you know what, guys? I think I can't wait for I seriously think Halloween. I know it's slow paced, but there's no gore except for one little strip of blood. I know there's some chest stuff in there, but it's not in a sexual way, and it's only for a second. And it's that theme song, like you say, you want that theme, you want that repetitive theme song. I think Halloween is a good one for kids. Can't
That's
wait
a
to show my
good
kids Halloween.
unorthodox choice. Like it's not one
Well,
that pops to mind, but it actually I feel like that fits.
it's one of the first ones that came to my mind because I was really young when I watched it, and right away I like idolized Michael Myers, and he was like an icon to me. And it's like, kids like Darth Vader or something. I think that Michael Myers can be that for kids too. Maybe not the best thing to like, but oh well.
I could see that. It's the music and then the fact that he represents that quiet kind of Batman
Yeah.
silhouette almost as a
Yeah.
kid. Like it makes sense. I went with Aliens, not Alien One. I think Aliens. It happened to be my daughter's favorite movie when she was 4 for a long time. It has Newt, so like kids tend to like that. It's a little more action packed. It's not as long because the first Alien movie is very long and drawn out to get there. But the movie Aliens, it's a lot of action packed. You got the cool, for those kids that like the Terminator movies and the Terminator 2 movies, Aliens is right up your alley with that one. So it keeps kids intrigued. Predator was another one that'd be really fun for kids, like if you consider, Predator's a good one. I said Chucky. I
Mhm.
think Chucky's a good one, man. If you go back to the original one, the Good Buddy doll. I mean, come on, man. Like
That's one of my
that,
first ones I watched as a kid.
yeah, I did too. Yeah. And then I think It Part One, whether you go with the remake or you go with the original, I think It Part One, it deals with a lot of kids in there, so kids can relate to that. It's preying off the horrors and all that stuff. So it can be very scary to kids, I think. But I think it's enough to kind of really entice them. So again, the reason why we have such a wide range and diversity here is because you have a wide range and diversity of kids and they have very different horror elements on it. So if you would have showed me something like, what do we say, Coraline, or if you would have
Witches.
showed me Coraline as a kid, it would have been cool, but like I'd be like, this is not scary at all. Like for me, I'd be like, nope, this is not a horror movie. This is just a kid's cartoon movie to me. But if you would have been started showing me a Nightmare on Elm Street, I'd be like, now we're talking. And this is 5-year-old me saying this. I feel like, okay, let's watch it.
No,
Yeah.
that is true. And again, as you said, we have to take into account uh, the personalities of the kids. Not no kid is created equal, and even if you have multiple kids, they might both be on completely different levels when it comes to what they're able to consume and accept and deal with. So there's all those factors you have to take into account beyond just what's in a movie. You have to strategically match it in a way, and sometimes they can be showing a couple of these movies to kind of find the level out, kind of to calibrate where that kid is at, and then you can
Mhm.
start working your way from there.
And just because they love horror movies doesn't make them a psychopath.
Right. Look
And
at us. We are just
yes,
fine.
and you don't, that's debatable.
Yeah.
But you don't need to show them movies like Hostel. Like you don't need to show them, stay away from the gore, the really gory ones, because I think that's where you start messing with the kid who then can start trying to mess with animals and things like that because they're gonna test to see. You don't need to show them gore horror. You don't need to go that way with it. So
So
no,
one things that has the essence of true horror, not the shock value of
correct.
horror. The essence of true horror, atmosphere, the creepy story, creepy scenes, those
Mhm.
aspects. So then they actually are appreciating the best aspects of horror, not just like, oh, that disgusting, graphic, violent image is seared in my head now.
You know what movie I was as you were describing that, I was like, here's what they shouldn't watch. Barbarian.
No.
Kids don't need to
Ugh,
watch that
no.
movie. When you were
Grown-ups don't
describing
need
the
to watch that
disgusting.
movie.
Yeah, that's
Grown
why when you're just talking about and describing about the grossness of it, Barbarian popped in my head. I'm like, nah, because there's a lot of conversation gonna go right over their head, and then when they see it, it's like they don't need to see that.
No, no one needs to see that.
So thank you for watching another episode of Not a Strong Start. Please like, subscribe, comment, share on YouTube channel Not a Strong Start. You can listen to us anywhere you listen to your podcast. You can follow on Instagram and Twitter, Not a Strong Start. I'm your host, Starter Pack. Follow me at King_Sangre.
I am not your host, Pre Spooks, and you can find me at This Is Mi Nombre on Instagram.
Free spooks.
I'm parental discretion is advised. You can follow me on Instagram at MariePlaysdoll.
I hear pre-spooks and I think like a cholo name. Hey, hey, we got
Hey, what's
spooks
up,
and we got
pre-spooks?
pre-spooks. That's his older brother, yo.
Yeah.